Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar. This evening, we are delighted to be joined by Professor Samson Kambalu, Fine Art Professor at Magdalen College and at the Ruskin. Samson has just been awarded the commission for the Fourth Plinth in Trafalgar Square for his piece Antelope. And this evening, he's going to talk to us about his work and in particular about the preparatory work for Antelope, which is going to be on the Trafalgar Square Fourth Plinth between September 2022 and 2024. While on the subject of Samson's work, we currently have an exhibition of Samson's work called Fractured Mission, which is in the Magdalen Old Library, open on Wednesday afternoons. The exhibition is free, but you do have to book in advance if you go to the Library and Archives website, on the college website. Samson, if you'd like to turn your camera on and unmute.
I think the host will have to unmute me, it says.
I can hear you now. There you go, brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much, Samson, good to see you. So I'm going to mute now and hand over to you for your talk on the cinema and Antelope. Thank you.
Right. Dinah, thanks for having me. I hope you can see me. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Basel. I'm attending Art Basel, as is a tradition in the art world this month. Art Basel after lockdown, so I haven't seen it yet. I'm coming in from Lisbon, actually, where I was installing a show at Chiakasha called Fractured Empire, featuring some of my latest works. So I just got here and I've got some light coming through the window. Outside me is the Rhine, and this is my hotel room by the Rhine. Okay. I'll see now. I will do this talk via PowerPoint, so bear with me as I try to launch it. Okay. Okay, I hope you can see my slides now. This is Cinema and Antelope. Well, I have a multimedia practice, and you could come to it from many angles. You know, I have a concept. You could call me a conceptual artist, and then it manifests in different media. But this evening, I'm going to start with, I'm going to concentrate on my preoccupation with cinema. It seems to me it's very central to my practice, or if you like, praxis, because my approach to art is not just the studio art, but also art as a way of life, really, as a way of doing time. And hopefully through this talk, you understand why I have focused on cinema, because it has a bearing on my latest, the commission that I won to put a sculpture on the Fourth Plinth. That's very much related to cinema. So I thought I would approach this talk from the cinema angle. I will also talk about not only cinema, but also Nyau masking tradition of Malawi. It seems to me there's a strong relationship between cinema and masking, at least from my experiences growing up in Malawi. So to talk about cinema for me is also to talk about Nyau masking tradition, but not only the Nyau masking tradition, but also the economy that inspires the masking tradition, which you could call the gift economy, if you like. Southern African countries, like for instance, a place like Malawi, there's still gift economy. When you're looking at it from under here, it's usually called underdevelopment. But from my experience and from my studies of the traditions there, I did my PhD on the problematic of the gift and art, and I looked at Nyau for 5 years, and I really appreciated what's happening in terms of kind of philosophical rigor, if you like, conceptual rigor of the tradition, let's say compared to, let's say, continental philosophy. Okay, so this is the Antelope. It took over 2 years to process this. basically in 2019 or thereabouts, I got an anonymous, no, not, I got an email from London Mayor's office saying that I've been nominated to propose for the Fourth Plinth. So this is the short list. When it comes to this stage, they spread their net wide. They look at artists who are perhaps making waves in the art world, and they invite them to propose, and the net is spread wide to the whole world. You start with a long list, and then it gets to a short list. So that the whole process took 2 years, all those stages, and it was under secrecy. And when they asked me to propose for the Fourth Plinth, I had the photograph of John Chilembwe on my phone. My work with film means that I like to read about African modernism. And one main figure of Malawian modernism is John Chilembwe. I was particularly struck by his use of photography when I was doing research on his life, see if he can inspire my own work, my own approach to film, my own work to art. And I was struck by his use of photography. It always seems to be very kind of aimed and very effective. And it spoke to me, so I put his photograph of him wearing a hat on my phone. And when I got this email from the mayor's office, the photograph was on my phone, and it was immediate. I said, this is the guy who's going on the Fourth Plinth. But I didn't know what I was gonna do. But let me show you perhaps a few more images. This is I'm installing a maquette in a show at Chiakasha, Lisbon. Usually the maquette is shown on this short plinth, but actually Trafalgar Fourth Plinth is very tall. So this is much more what it will look like. And the human being is almost at the bottom there, 6 feet at 6 foot, 6 feet. It's a very large equestrian plinth. And I wanted to put John Chilembwe there, but I didn't know how. This is how it will look. So basically, it's film inspired in that the star of this sculpture is larger than life, and the support, John Chilembwe's Charlie, is life size to Trafalgar Square. Most horses on Trafalgar Square, most the people on Trafalgar Square, their average is John Charles, and I think John Chilembwe is the size of a horse. I didn't say this in the application. I felt my way through the size of John Chilembwe, and I didn't know why this size worked. But then I've been thinking about it lately. I was like, look, John Chilembwe looks like a horse. It's just turned to a human being. And Charlie is the rider somehow. So that the meaning of this sculpture gets ever complicated by the day. This is how it will look from the back with Charlie at the front. And this is a photograph on which I was based, which I had on my phone. And John Chilembwe is wearing a hat. And the photograph looks ordinary, but at the time, it was illegal for Black people to wear hats in front of white people. You basically had to take it off and walk 500 meters before you put it back on. And a lot of politicians in Malawi starts their political activism after being beaten up wearing a hat in front of white people. It was, you took severe punishment. You were beaten up, thrown in jail. Some were even threatened with shooting. Some were shot. In fact, I was reading on the Chilembwe Rising, a book published by Oxford, which featured at my exhibition at Modern Art Oxford, New Liberia. The uprising there, you could get shot for trying to keep your hat on when past a white person. And when I saw this photograph, it looked ordinary, but when I read about hats during this time, I realized that it's a hat of subversion. And Chilembwe wore this hat in 1914 when he opened a church, which again was illegal for Black people to open a mission. But when Chilembwe, once a servant boy of a missionary, an English missionary called Joseph Booth, he was taken to America and he was educated there. And Booth was warning Chilembwe of the perils of colonialism, that it would lead to slavery. And when Chilembwe came back, he built his own church, was encouraging fellow Africans to start their own mission instead of just going to be under, the white people's missions, to take their destiny in their own hands. And of course, the colonials didn't like this. And months after taking this photograph of defiance, which he distributed among his followers, he was killed by colonial police. But there, Chole supported him. Chole was a missionary who came after Chilembwe's mentor, Joseph Booth, to run the Zambezi Industrial Mission. So he supported him. He wore the heart with them in defiance. And it was Chole's wife, actually, who took this picture. And you can see that the heart there is worn sideways for effect. This is why I like John Chilembwe. He has a lot of elements of performance. He knew that by wearing the heart this way, it has more effect. It almost looked like an antelope, by the way, John Chilembwe means antelope. So it almost looks like there's antlers. And antelope is also the principal Nyau mask in Malawi, of Nyau masking, which is a womb disguised as a woman. No, disguised as an antelope. I'll talk more about it later. So anyway, as I was looking at this photograph, how do I put these two figures on an equestrian plinth on Trafalgar Square? One day, maybe probably much, like a lot of ideas come to me at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the waking hour when I'm coming out of sleep. That's when my solutions come to me somehow. I don't know why. My brain is lucid without waking up. Anyway, so suddenly, well, as I woke up this other day, the figure of Chilembwe just went up, like the way it does here on the. Somehow I said, that's it. All I need to do is to make Chilembwe's figure larger, and that should do it. And that's what I did. And the inspiration for that shape of an animal, like maybe an antelope, was inspired by this sculpture. It's also called Chilembwe or Kasiamalio. A womb disguised as an antelope was the central principle of a sculpture of Nyau peoples. You can see it's a womb upside down. Actually, it's basically the pubis area upside down. Well, I'm telling secrets of Nyau masking now, but there's a lot to be said in Malawi culture that the principal mask is not a woman, but rather a womb. There's a difference. It solves a lot of problems in sexuation, especially affecting nowadays issues like feminism and stuff like that. These guys in Malawi already figured it out, that perhaps it's not best to put the whole woman on the pedestal. Only her womb will do. So this is what happens. And Chiakasha evolves around this masking structure, which can be worn by a single man or two men. And it dances round around. And it's called Chilembwe too. And John Chilembwe was named after this mask. I don't know, this is much probably what inspired him into kind of a performative missionary. He used a lot of performance. He used photography for effect, political effect, to affect his congregation. Well, it's worked a lot. I think that's what inspired me, and I was inspired by his photograph, his performance in photographs to make this sculpture for the Fourth Plinth. Okay, I'll show you an example of my film, because this is where we're going now. This is what led me to being commissioned. I'll just give you an example of a single film. They're very abstract. Hope you can bear with me. They are inspired by elements of early film. And these are filmed in Switzerland. It's called Across a Photograph. My films are not planned. I just walk around with a camera, and they're either usually will be filmed by my wife, Susan, or they are filmed by strangers. If she's not there, usually it's strangers. Like this one was filmed by a stranger in Brook. Somehow I just thought there's something poetic about crossing a very still photograph like this, simply crossing it. My films are psychogeographical. They're inspired by my feel of the place, the histories of the place, how I relate to the place. And they allude to so many things. There's silent politics in my films. There's just sheer celebration of being in the moment. There's a celebration of what could be called African time. My films are very nonlinear. We'll explore, we'll look at that more. This is 1,000 Years. I filmed this one in London. Again, I saw a building site near my flat, and I picked up the sand and did this trick. I must admit, I think I might have seen this either in Buster Keaton on Charlie Chaplin, because I'm inspired by these early film stars as well, for reasons I will explain soon. And somehow I thought this man should just be dusting his hat forever. I picked up the sand, stopped a stranger, and they filmed me. I make a lot of friends filming because people are mystified as to what the footage will end up looking like. And they follow me on Facebook or YouTube. They say what they want to see, what's going to happen next. Okay. So my films are never more than a minute. They're usually around 30 seconds, actually. And that's it. And I started making them when I was to share on Facebook, social media. So my sisters, maybe to have a communication with my sisters, my relatives. And they went on social media for 3 years before they were shown first as works of art in a gallery. A writer, an art historian saw them, wrote about them, and a gallery in South Africa discovered them and invited me for a show, and then so forth. So social media has been important for me. It's allowed me to cut corners. I think without social media, I would have queued a long time in the art world and its hierarchies, especially racial hierarchies often enough, which are changing now, but they're there. They were there when I came to UK in 2001. But social media was able to cut to the chase, like, no queuing, straight into the art world. So this is, I try to encourage my students to use social media. Don't queue, do your own thing, start your own fight, create your own audience, Anyway, my films in a gallery are shown like this, and this is an example at Whitechapel, multi-projections. I use wooden plinth, using improvisation methods I saw when watching film in Malawi when I was growing up, in markets, the so-called Nyau cinema, which I will explain. This is an installation I made at Whitechapel with text, and the text was taken, I think, a chapter from my PhD research, and it's about my experiences of watching films as a child in Malawi. I designed the room so it looked like a book, a talking book, talks with images, moving images. Anyway, so I'll start talking about my preoccupation with film, starting with this phenomenon from America called ghost dance, because the film I watched in Malawi, coming from Hollywood, from all over, and they used to be brought in and re-edited to capture a certain African sense of time, if you like. And for me, ghost dance is a good place to start. Ghost dance was this religious movement that started among the dispossessed native Indians in reservation. A man called Jack Wilson, a shaman kind of, he was advising his fellow native Indians in reservation that if you started dancing, doing the ghost dance, buffalo will flourish once more in American plains. Native Indians will regain their sovereignty. And of course, this was subversive and it was ruthlessly put down, this dance. But then Jack Wilson also predicted that not to worry, the ghost starts to return by an iron horse, meaning the train that was used to open up the Western frontier in America. And on this train, the train brought with it film. For me, at least the writer, Rebecca Sonnet, in her terrific book, River of Shadows, she reads the Return of the Ghost Dancers film, and she can trace the beginning of the ghost dance, let's say in the pioneers of film, such as Edward Muybridge. This is the spirit of the ghost dance returning to the American plains. Early film, before it became linear film, was subversive. It was popular in like circuses, in beer halls, taverns, with the subaltern, if you like, working class people, outsiders, until it was taken up after 1921, as some art historians say, when Charlie Chaplin made The Kid by the middle classes, if you like, who turned film into theater. Some art historians think that the film died in 1921 when Charlie Chaplin made The Kid. Anyway, but these are the beginning of cinema. And this is the kind of cinema I'm interested in, nonlinear, repetitive, capturing something of an African spirit, capturing something of the ghost dance, if you like, in nonlinear reading of time, as opposed to a kind of Western kind of linear 9 to 5 time that was imposed on the native Indians. But not only that, also in Africa, where I'm coming from, we've got this 9 to 5 time. It was big in the colonization process. But this form of film seemed to do what something like masking does, reintroduce a more generous approach to time, a sense of time. Muybridge, by the way, worked a lot among native Indians, and there's something subversive about these pictures. They are regarded as scientific study, but actually when you scrutinize them, there's no science in these pictures. They are arranged for aesthetic purposes, for other purposes. And this interests me a lot. This is Muybridge. And of course, for me, the ghost dance, if you like, the return, I met it through, well, first of all, film spread among the working classes in Britain. Of course, it had to be controlled because it contributed to loafing around. But still, I think that for us in Africa too, subversion against colonial subjugation came through medium like film. You know, people like Charlie Chaplin were also very popular in Africa when I was growing up, going film. And of course, my dad was like a middle class medical officer. He didn't approve this kind of film, but it was very popular with the subaltern, if you like, dispossessed people who had come out of the villages, denied their own culture and moved into the cities, and they saw solace in film. Not the kind of theatrical film, but this nonlinear film started with Muybridge, seen in Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, this sort of film called Cinema of Attraction. I think there's a guy who writes on this kind of cinema of the ghost dance, if you like, Tom Gunning. And when I came to Britain in 2000, having no job, not knowing anybody, I spent a lot of time in another form of, for me, ghost dance cinema. That's akin to early cinema, and that's the internet. You know, the nonlinearity, the fact that you can go into the internet and start your own thing, create your own sense of time. And this is where I met a lot of people in my early time in UK, in other Africans. In this, I don't know whether the internet cafes still exist now, but I made a lot of connections there. And this is just settled with me. And when I started making my films, my Nyau cinema, I used to make them and then watch in this is in Harrisden, London, in cinema booths. And when I was invited, eventually I was invited to show my films at Venice. You can see Venice Biennale 2015. And then eventually I wrote Rules. In fact, this was 2013. when I didn't obey to these rules, it seemed to me it wasn't Nyau cinema. Nyau cinema had to be short, brief, nonlinear, very abstract, spontaneous, within the everyday life. Anything else, for me, spoke of dead film, theater film, if you like. And I've designed booths. This is at Basel a few years ago with Kate McGarry. Stuff like that. Anyway, we'll just watch a film, Mountain Man. So I made this one in San Francisco when I was on an artist residency at the Headlands. And that's it. Okay, so this is where Malawi is. You can see Malawi. Some people wonder where Malawi is, but anyway, I think a lot of people know where Malawi is. But this is a very romanticized place created after David Livingstone saw the lake there, and he negotiated with the Portuguese to have this strip of water surrounded for a country. I don't know whether the country function, whether the Malawi functions as a country, but there we are. This is where we come from. My mother's village, where my mother came from, is divided in the middle with a road, a border. So some of my relatives are in Mozambique, some of them are in Malawi. Suddenly they woke up one day and the colonial powers had bulldozed the border. So these countries in Malawi, as you can see them, I don't know whether they really function as countries, because they are totally arbitrary, these borders. They paid no attention to the reality on the ground, you know. So anyway, it's a fascinating thing. So in other words, to having been born in Malawi, is already been born in some kind of weird romance, some kind of weird Western romance, and that you have to contend with, that you have to tarry with. And perhaps my work is about tarrying with that kind of weird romance, tarrying with that negative, if you like. Okay, I'll show you an example of a masculine. This is how it's seen in real life. Something more lively than the British Museum. And I'm wondering whether you can guess what that is. It's actually it's something of Malawian modernism. It's really difficult, actually. There's a modernism happening. I wonder if you can guess what that is, but since I'm not in touch with people just now, I can tell you that it's a train. You see, it's a train. So, very much dominating Malawian modernity, or rather, festival elements. Yeah, so when I was growing up, Malawi was full of this, especially in central region where I'm coming from, where my father comes from. These raves are ongoing and frustrated colonials, you know, because they generated this kind of ongoing generosity, social relations, very kind of the opposite of what was wanted, which was the world of work. You know, people are not supposed to be raving, they're supposed to be working in the fields. And the British thought that by getting rid of the masks, maybe they could develop the place, but of course it didn't work. There is another relationship to that mask, and this is one of the early films by the Lumiere brothers. This is a train arriving. It's the same principle. This is also a train. This is now French modern. This is French modernism. The mysterious thing is that what the Lumiere brothers thinking when they made this picture of the train arrival, like most Lumiere brothers films are mysterious. What's a war coming down or up? What's a train arrival? For me, This is closer to aspects of Nyau tradition, very subversive, and no wonder eventually this kind of approach to filmmaking is now confined to like advertising. It's the kind of sense of time that advertisers use to seduce the public. But you can wrestle back this sense of time, you know, and perhaps this is what I'm trying to do in my work. The sense of time that you can find in LA film, but also in Malawi masking tradition. So when I was growing up, the masking tradition had easily shifted from the traditional masking to the new film. It seemed to me when I went to Nyau cinema houses in Malawi, these were places where the film star had taken the place of the mask, you know? The film star was the new mask, and what the Africans used to do is to take films from Hollywood. They would re-edit them, you know, they would check out the boring bits, the nerve bits, and ended up with this action-packed abstracts showing, which then Africans liked, because in Africa, if you take the durational approach, as opposed to timeless rapture, audiences walk out. In Malawi, you have to deliver from moment to moment. It's not about durational kind of exposing things, and then time has to deliver from moment to moment. This is a sense of time that's very different from colonial time. In Africans, once denied masks, when they were moved into cities, they find this sense of time in early film, but also in later film, re-edited. Okay. It's more obvious perhaps in like Buster Keaton, again, very popular in Africa, film houses. This is that way the film houses that these guys would take. This is from the Congo, but in Malawi we also had they import these films and kind of re-edit them. Inspired the culture in Africa. That's why I have photography and film has always been popular in Africa because of its performative potentials. Painting was always weird. I started many years painting, but I don't know, but certainly photography tends to be a ready performance. And Africa took it. I think African photography of the 20th century is as good as any photographer in the world. Colonial cinema. Okay. So this is Elvis, new influences, again, Malawian, Nyau mask, traditional mask registering Malawian modernity. And this is explained, this is perhaps the world Chidembe would have grown up in, because the colonials also used the magic lanterns, film to colonize, actually. Film was big, but Africans took that film, educational films of the colonials or propaganda films of the colonials, made them into their own. And I'm not surprised that Chidembe here is standing here like a Western character from a Western movie. His heart turned sideways, ready to shoot, if you like. It's a fun photograph. And this was 1914. Already at this time, the African has recognized the potential for photography, for subversion, for effect. Almost as strong as the masks in the village. Because that's what the masks in the village are for. They are actually the opposites of power. And chiefs in Africa have to negotiate with masks. Because masks represent radical democracy. And this is how power and sovereignty is returned through masks. The masks have a tendency to create a relation, to bring us back to a place of generosity. That's not always useful for a chief who is trying to reduce people to the world of things or to the world of work, you know? And so the chiefs, they have to always negotiate. But anyway, I think Chidembe saw in performance potential for subversion, for subverting colonial power, and used it effectively. Anyway, and one of the things that Chidembe advocated was education. And he inspired many Africans, including the first head of state, Dr. Hastings Kamzubanda, the dictator, if you like, who, through a scholarship, sent me to this school. I was one of the, when I was growing up in Malawi, I was selected to go the so-called Eton of Africa, where we spent 5 years in Latin and Greek in basically classical education. And I spent 6 years at this place. And so growing up, I grew up, it's two different contrasting worlds, a contrasting world that you've already begun to see in my work, which I've already explored. Because this place was totally, all teachers here were Western, you know, from the age of 13, my teachers were from Belgium, UK, from France. Banda had a controversial policy that a Malawian shouldn't teach at this school for some reason, for political reasons, most likely. But yeah, I think the project was to totally turn us inside out. But was that turned out inside out? I think that as I grow older, I've really grown to appreciate the resilience of Africa. You know, I went to an extremely Western school. I think I've ended up becoming an extremely Africanized artist. So I don't know what happened there. I did come out of this school looking down on my on traditions in my home village. I think I came out of this with a lot of snobbery against, in a way, against Western education, because I felt that the philosophies taught in the villages were much deeper than the prestige of places like this. But nevertheless, it's this school that's helped me find my way in the world, helped me articulate what I know of Africa to the world. So this is another film I made in London. This is called Pickpocket. I saw this guy wearing a Victorian jacket, and I asked the stranger to follow us, and that was Pickpocket. The man in front doesn't know that I'm following him. He doesn't know at all. And that's how I made Pickpocket. Okay. So what did I learn at Campus Academy? A lot of Western art. And Western art is usually based around the idea of art as mimesis, mimetic art, if you like, representation, art as a representation. It's a very shallow understanding, actually, of Greek art. I don't know whether the Greek really, well, a few philosophers like Plato wrote of art as a representation, but I don't know whether the Greeks agreed. I think Greek art on its own, we studied again, and I've studied it again in some order. I think you see more things there. I did a project once in Liverpool studying classical sculpture, and what I saw there was a representation. I really saw time in these lines and the eye in radical communication. When you're looking at the Greek sculpture, it's like you're staring at a monster. The eye of the artist stares back at you in every line. You know, what's Greek sculpture hiding? Some monsters, thousand-eyed monsters. That's what Greek sculpture is. It's closer to Nyau, I would say. That's what I would say, that representation. Anyway, and eventually studying Western art, I went to University of Malawi, and there I started exploring modern art. You know, starting with people like Picasso, and I had learned to paint in a traditional way, but by the time I got to university, I started breaking up my style, following traditions like Picasso. We were looking at African sculptures, for instance, because I thought this was bringing me closer to the African village. Film. A lot of people don't realize how Picasso is inspired by film. A lot of historians put a kind of sophisticated spin on Picasso, but actually Picasso and Brook were big fans of cinema. And they were actually trying to paint here, cinema, the way you can see reality from multiple angles and stuff like that. The animation, the sense of time in these paintings are very much of LA film. The use of light in this film, you know. Some artists were more straight, perhaps, in their revelation, that they were inspired by film. This is Savage, Cocker. And I learned all this stuff, and I experimented a lot with abstract art. Yeah, eventually I went right out of it. And the way I went out of painting was at once. I think a sister of mine was inviting me one time, and I had a boy in my studio and the Bible. You know, Malawi being a Christian country, you always have a Bible. And as I was speaking to my sister about theology, I tore pages from my Bible and plastered them with PVA glue. And for me, the ball glowed in my hand. And at once, this was my moment of Paul on the road to Dabaskas. I dropped painting at once and became a conceptual artist. And soon I made this work in 2000 called Holy Ball. I was invited for an artist residency in Holland. And from Holland, I went to study for my master's in Nottingham, at Nottingham Trent. I got a place at the Slade, but I couldn't afford it as an overseas student. So I had to give it up to go to a cheaper university at Nottingham Trent, which is actually was a bore. You know, and this is where I did my master's, simply because I couldn't, as an overseas student, there was no way I could have gone to the Slade. So I had to give that one up. And it's one of the best decisions I made, because Nottingham Trent was a bore. It was a great, I think probably if I went to the SMAG, to the Slade, I would have just become another SMAG fine art student. The Trent humbled me, made me focus really on art rather than prestige, I suppose. And yeah, and there I got married. Susan, my wife, who is from Scotland, we met in Malawi. When we had just finished, I had finished undergraduate. I was in the Department of Fine Art, and she was in the Department of Theology. I was 23, and I think she was 22. We met, we parted, but then met again in UK. And then from Nottingham, I started in at Chelsea. We moved to London. Now I was resident, I was a citizen. Now I could afford to go to study local. So I started a PhD at Chelsea, which was very affordable, well, kind of. And then I got a scholarship. By then I had written a couple of books about, first one, The Jive Talker, about my growing up in Africa. Yeah, and that research took me to Yale, Smithsonian, and I came back. Yeah, well, a lot of things happened. But the thing I discovered in modern art was, which I felt was closer to my understanding of art through the Nyau tradition, was like Dada, you know? So this came to me later on when I was developing my work, like Duchamp, you know? For me, I don't think that art necessarily is a complements power. I think for me, art is the opposite of power. Art should put power to task, not just kind of complement it. Well, some artists think that. Maybe they think that art should complement the man. I don't think art should complement the man. I think art should keep the man on the edge. This is what the Nyau tradition is about, keeping the chief on the edge. And for me, I find this spirit in Dada, you know, Dada, eventually leading on to Situationism. The subject of which was I went to, when I was at Yale, I studied in the archive was a situationist there, Sanguinetti. I like the Situationist because eventually they spiraled out of the idea of art as a representation. They didn't feel that was enough. They spoke of art as socialized praxis, art within the everyday life. And you can see the Situationists there hanging around, working hard. Art historians think the Situationists were lazy, but I see a lot of work in this. Art as socialized praxis. I thought the Situationists, even more than that, or even closer to African art, by trying to put art beyond representation, beyond the gallery, into the everyday life. So I studied these, see if I could be inspired, and attitudes in my films recall aspects of the Situationists, their playful approach to life, but deep intellectuals, playful but rigorous intellectuals. That's what I like about Situationism. Play doesn't necessarily mean that you're shallow or simplistic. In fact, for me, to play is the hardest thing. To play effectively, one needed to have known everything. really tough to play. It's much easier to play serious than to play, in my opinion, in my experience of being an artist, and also as I get older. Okay, so situationism, yeah, which took me back to masking, some of which began to inspire me. If you went to see my show, New Liberia at Modern Art House, I made these two elephants inspired by Nyau masking, made out of Oxford gowns. These are Fellow's gowns, which are turned into elephants. These two elephants are called the drawing elephants. And I'm recreating these elephants in Lisbon. Usually I kept this kind of aspect of my work in the background, but lately I've been bringing this structure to the foreground again from my childhood. And it's a very socialized practice because a lot of people help me to make these sculptures. I bring a lot of technicians together to realize these works. That I like, that it's not just me sat in the studio, but I can use skills, other people can share skills and make these works. That's very important for me. Anyway, this is the research that I presented at Venice of situationism that led to the guy suing me, Sanguinetti. But it's a long story. But I won the case. Used a lot of performance to copy his archive and take it back to Italy, where a lot of situationists were not happy that he had sold the archive to Yale. And I told the Italians, the situations, not to worry, that I'll bring back the archive to them. And when I was at Yale, I spent 4 months photographing his whole archive playfully. And then I took it back to Italy, showed it. He sued us and he lost. Okay, and he owes me some money now. So at Modern Art Oxford, I built him a cell called Sanguinetti cell until he's paid from my legal fees. He's still, you know. Anyway, it's a kind of play. It's a very typical situation. Is this kind of antagonistic approach to creativity. I think it's all positive. I don't think it made me harm at all, and I hope he knows that didn't mean him harm when I copied his archive. In fact, I think I gave it more meaning after he saw it. Here. The Hollywood Venice. Okay, so maybe I'll just play one more film and then you can stop me. This is called Runner. I shot this one in Mystic, where they found the slave ship Amistad docked. You know, when I was in America, landscapes in America, you don't really see nature. For me, I see film in America. America was like one big Western. It was hard to see nature in America. You saw history in America. And I saw myself running in this field in Nyau, and can make this film called Runner. Okay, so I did these works and others for a bit, and then eventually I was invited to propose for the Fourth Plinth. So you can see I had never made a public bronze sculpture before, but somehow somebody on the panel believed that a person who makes films such as these would be able to make a public sculpture. So they invited me to do this sculpture, and I came up with Antelope. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, Samson. I mean, the word that springs out to me from what you've been saying is play. Mm-hmm. This sense that there's an amazing playfulness in what you're doing, and your sense of humor comes through it too. I loved in Mountain Man, the disappearing man, just his boots left. That's just fantastic. But also, I love the way that you've made so many layers of meaning from the photograph and translated now into the sculpture. So now when I look at the image of what's going on the Fourth Plinth, now what I see is John Chilembwe, the Pan-Africanist activist, and his friend. I see the different sizes for the film star and the supporting actor. I see the hat, there's a version of the hat. I see the fact that he's wearing it sideways and it's an antelope's horns. I see the womb mask and the womb and the antelope together. And I see the generous African vision of time instead of the Western 9-to-5 time. And you've made me see all that just from what you said in the last 40 minutes.
That's very good. It's very
that's fantastic. It's complete. It's like light bulbs coming on. And we've only got time for a couple of questions. But let me ask you, first of all, we had a question that was submitted in advance asking you about the early years of your practice and what you would recommend to young artists starting out as how to make your mark. How would you recommend to young artists to make their mark?
Yeah, you have to have the confidence. Like the best advice I got at the beginning of my career was when I was on an artist residency in Holland. And I was like, oh, how do you get into the art world? And she says, because I saw, artists had radio audiences, and he says, you don't. He says, you create your own audience. You don't get into the art world. You make your own audience. So instead of worrying about how you get into the art world, you start something and let the art world come to you. Usually the art world likes to come to you.
It sounds like social media has been really important for you in finding your audience.
Yes. So the first thing for me to make an audience was after my master's, I got a grant to write a book, and artists hate application, but instead of getting a job which will just tire you out, live off your mom, your boyfriend, girlfriend, write a book.
That's terrible advice.
Really, don't get a job. It will just make it. Listen, if you're gonna run a marathon, you have to run.
Yeah.
You cannot do it part-time. You cannot come exhausted, working in a pub, trying to if I like when I was writing my first book, I was writing 9 to 5. I had a discipline to go at my desk, even nothing comes. I got this advice from Murakami. He said, you go to the writing desk, you stay there. Even if nothing is coming, 9 to 5, discipline. And sometimes things came, and I did this for 3 years, and I wrote my first book. And that's how I created my audience. It was painful, but it was very rewarding, because that book I toured with, especially did well in German for some reason, maybe because of my father's love of Nietzsche. There's a lot of Nietzsche in my first book. And I toured in Germany for 4 years with this book. I would go to universities, and I took my ball with me, which came out of the writing project as well, which was part of the writing project. And simply made my own name. I went to different universities around the world, read for my book, and we kicked the ball about. And eventually, some of the venues that I went to had connections to the art world. And slowly I started getting back into the art world. And by that time, I'd started making films. And then that's how the art world came.
So the advice is live off your mom or your girlfriend.
Oh, yeah.
Use social media and find your audience. And sit at your desk 9 to 5. But sit at your desk 9 to 5. This is a perverse instruction from somebody who rejects Western time.
Or if you don't want to live off your mom, dad, or girl, make time to write applications. Grants are painful, but like for me, that's a very good point. And I got a grant from the Arts Council to write a book. It wasn't much. It was 30,000, 15,000 a year. But that.
I've got one more question. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're running out of time. I want to ask you one more question. Question is, we had a screening of Chiwetel Ejiofor's The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind at Magdalen in 2019. Have you seen this movie? And do you think it offers a good representation of the role of masks in Malawian culture?
Have I seen the film? I took part in the film. I made Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. I was the cultural advisor there, translated, and I played a guy called Joe Godstein, the shopkeeper, also who cuts the bicycle to be made into a windmill. Yeah, I think that it's not what I'm doing now. I have, trust me, I've been asked to write scripts for films. I don't feel I'm ready for that kind of film.
It sounds like your interest in film is quite different from what you would think of as commercial cinema.
There are moments of Nyau in the Boy Johannes Wind, especially the first cut, which was really inspired by aspects of things I've talked about. But I noticed Chiweto invited me to see the first cut, and I loved it because it used a lot of experimental cuts, reflecting something of masking, something of cinema of attraction. But the second
maybe they need to do a Nyau re-edit of it.
Yeah, the second version, I noticed that it had been totally
made more bland.
Yeah, so that's fine. I mean, there are moments, but that's not what I'm doing. But I was glad. I mean, for me, the thing I liked about working on a film set was the crew unit. It's the lifestyle on there. If I knew when I was young, I probably would have worked on film sets because the lifestyle was great. The unit, you know, they don't even watch the films. The unit are there.
I wanted to share with you one final comment.
Okay.
We're going to have to finish in a second.
Right.
But here's another. It says, not a question, but deeply felt the need to send my appreciation for clarifying for us your art. Malawi and a different view of time. Love the idea of African time, feeling enlightened. And I feel the same way. So thank you so much, Samson. That was absolutely fascinating. And I would encourage anybody who is in the area of Oxford, do please book online and come and see Samson's exhibition in Magdalen. And of course, before very long, you'll be able to come to Trafalgar Square and see Antelope.
Thanks so much for having me, Dinah.
Thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Thank you very much, Samson. Thank you for giving us your time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the art fair.
Cheers.
Thank you.